Hi there, my name is Lisa Norton and I am the designer of Willow Lake, and I'd like to thank you for participating in this program. So to help you with your blocks, I thought I would give you a few tutorials on how to make your blocks a little easier. First of all, one of my tips is to go ahead and 3-hole punch your pattern and put it in a binder. The reason is sometimes pages get lost or buried under fabric, and there's a few pages that you're going to be referring to quite often. Page number 4 and page number 5 will be ones that you do or will refer to in almost every month. So the first month that we're going to talk about is the Wild Ducks block. It is for month 1. The Wild Ducks block is made from half square triangles and flying geese. Now, half square triangles and flying geese are the building blocks of quilting, and I should expect by the time you're done with this quilt, you'll be a pro at these. So the way that this is laid out, it is making half square triangles and flying geese in multiple ways. So if you take a glance back at page 4, you'll see that the half square triangles are, you can make them at a 2 at a time method, which is indicated by the 2x, a 4 at a time method, which is indicated by the 4x, and the 8 at a time method indicated by an 8x. If you go to the flying geese, you'll see that you can make them 1 at a time, indicated by a 1x, or you can make them 4 at a time, indicated by the 4x. So when you get to month 1, Wild Ducks block, you're going to see the cutting instruction has a whole bunch of HST, that stands for half square triangle, the slash, and then the 8x stands for 8 at a time. So you'll have half square triangle, 8 at a time, half square triangle, 4 at a time, half square triangles, 2 at a time, and then so on down. If it's the flying geese, it's indicated with an FG, 4 at a time, FG, 1 at a time. So it can get a little confusing, so we're just going to take it one bite at a time. The first thing you're going to do is go ahead and cut all of your fabrics for this block. When your fabrics are cut, next you're going to pair them up. So the first on the list in number 1 is flying geese. So you're going to find your flying geese pieces. So I usually skim through here, find my FGs, and that's what I'll start pairing. So to make 6 flying geese using the 4 at a time method and the 1 at a time method twice, I'll go to the brown. See, that's my brown in my background. The brown says 1 5 1/4 square for flying geese 4 at a time method. That would be this block. And then 2 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles for the flying geese 1 at a time method. 1 and 2. So now I need to pair it with the coordinating fabric. So I'm going to be looking at my background fabric as shown in the diagram. So I'm going to skim through and I find the FG. 4 2 7/8 squares for flying geese 4 at a time method. That would be these right here. So I've got my 4 2 7/8 squares, and that will go with my 4 at a time method. And then if I come down to here, you have 12 2.5 inch squares, but in parentheses it says 4 of them are going to be for the flying geese 1 at a time method. So this is 1 flying geese, and this is another flying geese, and I set aside those other ones. So now we can stack these, and that one's ready to go. So now we can start on the half square triangles. The first half square triangle shown in step number 1 is a harvest gold in the background, and it says that we're going to make 6 half square triangles using the 2 at a time method and the 4 at a time method. So I'll skim over to my harvest gold, which says 2 4 1/8 squares for half square triangles 4 at a time. So I've got my 2. And then we have 1 3.5 inch square for a half square triangle 2 at a time. So I've got this one here. And then we're going to have Oop, I messed that up. It's supposed to be this one. This is my matching one. So we have the 3.5. So then we're going to look at what is our backgrounds for these. So our background for the 4.5, the half square triangles 4 at a time, easy enough for me to say, is 1 4 1/8 square. So I've got that paired. And then the other one for a half square triangle, 2 at a time, it has 2 3-inch squares. So I'm just going to use one of those. And it pairs with this one. I have one left over. So don't worry, you didn't need to find another background for this one, because this one is actually going to be used over here for making 4 half square triangles using the 4 times method, but you're going to be pairing it with a green. Here's my green. So now I know these are paired correctly, so I'll set those aside. Now our next one to do is to make 10 half square triangles using the 8 at a time method and the 2 at a time method. So if you go back over, you'll find that 6 1/4 inch squares for half square triangles 8 at a time. So that would be this square. And then I go down here and I skim through and I find the 8 at a time, and it's 1 6 1/4 inch square. So that would be this one. So I know how these now paired. And then I need the 2 by method. The 2 by method is 1 3-inch square. And to pair it, I'm going to need another 1 3-inch square. And now I can look at my pairs and I can double check to make sure that I do indeed have everything paired just like step 1. I have some squares left over. I have these, and I have these, and I have these. These are actually going to be used in the wild duck. You can see I have some squares here, so I know, okay, these don't have to be made into half square triangles. And I have these extra squares, and there is some extra places that we're going to just need squares, so that's what these are for. And then these pieces are going to be used in step 2 after you make your flying geese. So we know these are also correctly cut. So now you're ready to sew. I'm here to help you with the flying geese 1 at a time method. So if you refer to your book, it's on page 5 at the top. It's called 1 at a time method 1X. You're going to start with 2 squares that are 2.5 inches each, and you'll also have a 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle. I like to refer to these as the wings and this as the body part of the flying geese. So you're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on both of those 2.5 inch squares. And then we'll position it onto the body of the flying geese. So you're going to position, so it goes from corner to the middle. And when this is nice and lined up, you're going to just sew right on that line. I like to start from this flat side and sew to the corner. And the reason is if I start from the corner, it has a tendency to get shoved into that little dark pit underneath the needle. Okay, I have sewn my flying geese first wing. And then the next step is we're going to press that to the corner. Now the next step is to, with your scissors or a rotary cutter, you can just trim 1/4 inch away from that seam line. Now if this is one of your first times making flying geese and you're just a little unsure that you're going to get it right, just don't trim it just yet. We'll trim at the end just to be sure that you have it exactly the way you want it. Next, we're going to position the next wing. Now, if I position my wing so that this first wing is open, you're going to end up with issues. So I'll have this one sewn, but because this is sewn, it's going to keep this wing from laying flat. So be sure to have this wing closed before you sew on this one. Now it will intersect. It's supposed to intersect at this point by 1/4 inch from the side. So now we'll sew this piece on from the flat side to the corner. Okay, I'm back. I've sewn my last wing on, and the last step is to just press it out. Now you'll see that my point is 1/4 of an inch away from that flat edge. So I'm happy with the way my flying geese looks, so I can now trim off this excess. It'll just be too bulky just to leave it on. So I'm just going to trim it about 1/4 of an inch away from that seam line. You can use a rotary cutter or shears. There we go. Looks good. Give it a good press. Your finished flying geese should measure 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Hi there, this is Lisa again. This time we're going to be talking about the 4 at a time method to make your flying geese. So if you refer to page 5, we're going to be working at the 4 at a time method with the 4X. And so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on your 2 7/8 inch pieces. These I like to refer to as the wings. And then this piece here is the 5 1/4 inch square, which I like to refer to as the body. So you're going to lay your squares onto your 2 smaller squares onto your larger square, and they're going to overlap at this point here. The next step is you're going to sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of that drawn line. So we're going to stick a pin in this and take it to our sewing machine. Alrighty there. I've got my seams. I'll bring it a little closer so you could see. I did 1/4 of an inch seam on each side of that line. You see how I pinned my blocks? I just put 2 pins on either side so that they were out of the way, but held my block where I want it to go. And then this block is overlapped. It doesn't matter which one is overlapped over the other. They just will overlap at the intersection. Laura, could you give this a quick cut for me? So now the next step is Laura's going to cut it right on that pencil line. There we go. So she trimmed it right on the pencil line for me. So now I have 2 halves. We can get rid of our pin. I'm going to need that iron though. And now we're going to press I'm going to just set the seam real quick. And we're going to press the seam open. Just like that. Now I'm sure you're thinking that does not look like a flying geese, but wait, there's more. I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Press it wide open. And now we're going to position our next piece. So we had drawn the line corner to corner, and this time we're going to put that drawn line in that corner, and then this is going to go straight between the 2 mountains there. And you're going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch on each side of this drawn line. Now I know a lot of people have trouble with the alignment with this one. So we're going to stick a pin in it again, just in this outer edge to hold it. And then I'm going to show you where you're supposed to be shooting for. Again, I don't like to start at the corner if I don't have to, but you can start at the corner if you prefer, or you can start on this end. So when you're sewing and you have the edge of your foot lined up with this line, your needle should fall right there at that valley, and you're going to sew to that end. And then when you turn it around, you're going to be 1/4 of an inch from that draw line, and you're going to end, your needle should land right at that valley. Hi there, I'm back. So I just finished sewing my square on. So I started at this point here, my needle landed right directly at that valley, and I was 1/4 of an inch from this seam. Be sure to check your 1/4 inch seam allowance because it's very important to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So I sewed all the way down to the corner, I just flipped it around and sewed all the way back. So now I'm ready to cut on that drawn line. Laura, will you do the honors?
Mm-hmm. It is easier to cut without the pins in place.
Here we are. And now our last step for this section. See, isn't that beautiful? You now have 2 flying geese.
Iron is hot.
All right, so I'm gonna give it a quick flat setting the seam. There you go. Now you'll want to trim that dog ear, but that point will be 1/4 of an inch from this edge. And that's the way it's supposed to measure up. You'll cut off the dog ears on both these ends and at that tip. And your flying geese should measure 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Don't trim it smaller if you think you want to try and straighten up the edge. If it's a little bit crooked, leave it crooked. You don't want to make it too small. It needs to be 2.5 by 4.5. And we're going to do the same thing with this side, and then we'll have all 4 of our flying geese done. Hi there, this is Lisa Norton, and I'm here to show you how to do your half square triangles 2 at a time. So if you refer to your pattern, it's on page 4, and it's at the top of the page, and we're going to do the 2 at a time method with the 2x. So you're going to start with a 1 3.5 inch square from each of the fabrics that are called out in your pattern. On the lightest square, you're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. I tried to make my pencil mark nice and dark so that it's easier for you to see, but you can do it as light as you like. Your next is you're going to position your 2 squares together, right sides together, and you'll position them so they're exactly squared up. Our next step is we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of that drawn line. So I'll be right back. Hi there, I'm back. So I just sewed 1/4 of an inch seam on either side of that drawn line. My next step is to cut on that drawn line. There you go. 2 half square triangles. Now our next step is to press them, and then we're going to trim them to 2.5 inches. Pull my ironing board over a little. So you'll want to first press, it's called setting the seam when it's closed like that. And then for this block, we're going to press the seam towards the darker fabric. We're going to use the side of our iron. There we go. Our next step is to trim it down to 2.5 inches. So when you trim your squares down to 2.5 inches, you're going to use the diagonal line in your ruler. You align that diagonal line with the diagonal seam of your block. Now, if you have a smaller ruler, I like small rulers for small cuts and big rulers for big cuts, but I know it takes a while to accumulate those nice big rulers. Some of us even have 2.5 inch square rulers. Those are even nice too. When I first saw the tiny ones, I thought they were for keychains, but alas, we actually use those. So you're going to line your diagonal seam up with the seam, your diagonal line of your ruler with the seam of your block, and you're going to find 2.5 inches. So you can see this line right here is on the outside edge. I like to give it a little trim on both sides, so I try to split any difference. Try to avoid the spider hold. That's with your fingers are straight up. The spider hold is this, and it'll swing on you if you use that. And now I'm going to flip it around. I'll line up that diagonal with my diagonal seam. This time I'm going to find my 2.5 inch mark there on my ruler. And flat hand, I'm going to go ahead and give this a trim. There you go. This one's now trimmed to 2.5 inches. Now I like to recommend a product that's called a block lock. And they make block locks specifically for 2.5 inch half square triangles. But cost effective if you use a larger one and then trim them down. The reason I like the block locks is they have this little ridge, and that ridge will grab right onto that seam. So I'm going to swing my, flip it around here. There we go. So my lip of my ruler here, right there, is now going to catch on that seam. And I can slide it up and down on that seam. And what the advantage of this ruler is it'll keep my seam corner to corner. And now I can do the same thing. And this time I'll find my line for my 2.5 inch, align it with my outside edge, making sure my seam is still caught in that groove. And now this one is now trimmed down to 2.5 inch squares. So these two are now ready. Hi, this is Lisa Norton, and I'm here to show you how to do the 4 at a time method for half square triangles. So if you refer to your page number 4, it's the one in the middle called 4 at a time method with a 4x in the parentheses. So this one is a fun one to do. It's fairly easy and simple. You're going to have 2 squares, and they're going to be cut at 4 1/8. So I have my 2 4 1/8 squares. Next, I'm going to line those up so they're perfectly aligned. And now I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam all around the outside edge of my square. All right, now I'm back. I did a 1/4 inch seam on all sides, and you can go off the edges. You don't have to stop exactly at that 1/4 inch. And now I'm going to give it a little bit of a press. I like to add spray starch. This really isn't the preferred method of making half square triangles because we're working with the bias. That's why I like to give it a little spray starch. When working with the bias, you want to be sure not to use any steam, but the spray starch helps it to behave. So we're going to be cutting this once on the diagonal, or actually twice on the diagonal, I suppose, from corner to corner. There we go. And I have my 4 half square triangles. So my next step is to press the seam towards the dark. And now we're going to square it up. And we're going to square it up by using the diagonal, the 45-degree line on our square, and lining it up with the seam of our half square triangle. So there really shouldn't be much to trim off with this one. Basically, this one is just going to be the the little dog ear trimmed. Just a little sliver on this side. And then we're going to line it up with that 2.5 inch mark on this outside edge. Line up your diagonal. And really, it's just the tiniest of slivers. There, this one's all ready. I'll do that to these other 3, and I'll have my 4 half square triangles done. Hi there, this is Lisa. This time we're going to be talking about the 8 at a time method in order to make your half square triangles. So if you refer to page 4, It's at the bottom portion here, 8 at a time, with the 8x in the parentheses. So you're going to start with 6 1/4 inch squares. So in this example, I was making a 6 1/4 inch of a square of the dark green and the background. I had already drawn an X from corner to corner on my lighter square, and then I sewed a 1/4 inch seam on either side of those drawn lines. I'll bring it up a little closer so you can see that I have a 1/4 inch seam on either side of those drawn lines. Now, to keep it from wiggling around while I sewed, I just stuck a pin on all 4 sides. My next step now is to give it a quick little press. I like to use a little spray starch when I press mine, so let me give it a quick squirt. And that just helps nest the seam so that it's a little easier to cut. And so now I'm going to be cutting vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to find the halfway measurement. So for 4 1/4, it's going to be 3 1/8. And then I'm going to cut. And it should intersect right at that spot there. Yep, I'm good. And without moving my square, I'm going to do the exact same thing again. And lining up at that intersection, I should be still at 3 1/8. Okay, now the easier part, we're going to cut once on the diagonal, right on that pencil line. There you go. That was a very quick way of making 8 half square triangles. So my next step is to press it with the seam going towards the darker fabric. And then with a square with the diagonal, you're going to line that up and you're going to trim it down to 2 1/2 inches, just like we did with the 2 previous examples. Hi, this is Laura with a quick tip. So we're very carefully going to take our blocks and we're going to be matching it. And so I am carefully making sure that my colors are all laid exactly the way it was patterned. So I've slowly and carefully made sure everything was turned, but I need 2 of these blocks. So I know that my second block, I am just going to lay my large ruler on top, and it's a fast match of the puzzle pieces so that I know I've got both of my blocks and I'm ready to sew them together. So now that Laura's ready to go sew one of these geese, I want to tell you some tipping pieces? No, I want to give you some tips. Some sewing tips, some accuracy tips. So when we're sewing this block together, we're going to sew it in rows. So you're going to sew this row together, then you're going to sew this row together, then you'll sew this row, and then this row. So when you do your alignment, I tell people to say to themselves, what's the point? So the point with these 2 pieces here, this is your point. So you line up to that point, just like that. So it's lined up right there. If it is slightly long or short at this end, it's not going to matter. So we're going to line up with our point, and this is how I would sew. Just straight down like that. So when you're looking at your other ones, so we would have sewn these two together. Now we're ready to add this piece. What's the point? The point's right there. So when you line them up, you're going to be certain to line up exactly, perfectly alignment at that one. And if it's slightly long or short at this end, it's not going to be as big a deal. Now pretending we had sewn that on, we're going to get here and we're going to say, well, what's the point? Well, we've got 2 points. We got a point here and we have a point here. So when we line this one up, we're going to make sure that it's nice and aligned here, and then you're going to line up nice and aligned there. If there's any differences, you're going to give it a little tug and ease any differences. So you have 2 points on either end that needs to be aligned up. Okay, so that is our what's the point tip. And we'll come back in just a minute with our rows sewn.
Okay, all done.
Wow, Laura is very fast in sewing. So I was going to show you, before she sewed the whole block together, I was going to show you how we press the seams, so I can show it from this side. So if you see, these seams are all pressed going that direction, these seams are all pressed going this direction, and vice versa. That way, when you put the rows together, those seams nest, and you get these lovely intersections. Didn't you do a great job? Okay, the next step after this is sewing on the row of flying geese. What did we do with those geese?
Right here.
Oh,
They
good.
didn't fly too far.
They didn't fly too far. That's good.
Here we go.
So let me slide this one down a bit so we have a little bit more free space. So this is going to be our flying geese in the upper left. Still in the camera view. Good. And then this is going to get sewn to the bottom.
And this will eventually sew
And when
to the
this one
top.
gets sewn, we'll sew it to the top. And then those 2 blocks
This
get
one's
sewn together.
out of the camera at the moment.
Out of the camera,
so
we'll bring it back down. Pretend it's on the top, but we're out of camera space.
Here, we'll move this way.
We're going to move our camera back and forth.
There we go. Awesome.
Okay, so I think you got the picture. So
It looks great.
I think it's going to be a fun block. It sure is pretty in the quilt. Alrighty, well, we'll catch you at the next video.